In the quiet town of Brighton Falls, 30-year-old Daniel Wyatt was preparing for the happiest day of his life. After 2 years of dating, he and his fiancée, Alyssa Morgan, were just 3 weeks away from their wedding. Daniel was well-liked, a junior architect who had recently landed a major promotion. Alyssa, a part-time dance instructor, was known for her bright smile and seemingly boundless energy. Friends described them as the perfect couple. But beneath the surface, there were small, almost invisible cracks. Daniel had recently lost weight and complained of unusual fatigue. At first, he attributed it to wedding stress and work pressure. Alyssa, too, seemed more distant, more irritable. At the urging of his best friend, Daniel scheduled a routine health checkup. It was supposed to be nothing, just a formality. Instead, it shattered his world. The blood test came back positive for HIV. Confused and terrified, Daniel immediately thought there must have been some mistake. He demanded a retest. 2 days later, the confirmation arrived. It was real. Daniel had never been with anyone else during his relationship with Alyssa. He trusted her completely. At first, he spiraled inward, doubting himself, questioning the universe. Then rage crept in. Quiet, cold, meticulous rage. When he confronted Alyssa at their shared home, her reaction stunned him. She broke down, sobbing hysterically, admitting that she had known for months. She had been diagnosed 6 months earlier, but said she had been too scared to tell him. She begged for forgiveness. She said she loved him. She said it wasn't intentional. Daniel said nothing. He picked up his car keys and left. Alyssa cried alone in the living room, unaware that her world, like his, was about to end. Daniel sat in his car for hours that night, parked in a dark corner of a grocery store parking lot. He didn't turn the radio on, didn't touch his phone. He stared through the windshield into the wet pavement, the drizzle blurring the world into a smear of grays and reds. In the chaos of his thoughts, one question echoed louder than the rest. Why? The following morning, Daniel called in sick to work. He told no one what had happened, not even his closest friends. Isolation felt safer. He spent the day searching Alyssa's belongings. Her laptop, her phone, old bills and notes she had shoved in drawers. The more he dug, the worse it became. There were deleted text messages he was able to partially recover, flirtatious conversations with at least 2 men he had never heard of. There was a payment confirmation for a motel reservation from 7 months ago, a few weeks before her diagnosis. A private browser history littered with forums discussing living normal lives while knowingly being HIV positive. Some threads even debated whether or not disclosure was always necessary if the person was asymptomatic. The Alyssa he thought he knew had never existed. A rage began to crystallize inside him. Not the wild, impulsive rage of a man betrayed, but a cold, methodical fury. He spent 2 days planning in silence, sleeping barely 3 hours a night. He began by canceling the wedding, quietly, impersonally. A single email to the venue, the florist, the caterer. He didn't tell Alyssa. He just erased the future they had built, piece by piece. Then he started visiting hardware stores, buying supplies he didn't even try to explain to himself. Tarps, rope, duct tape, cleaning solvents. Always in cash, always from different places. He rehearsed conversations with Alyssa in his mind. Calm, logical exchanges that always ended with her crying and him watching, emotionless. He pictured her face crumpling when he confronted her again, this time with evidence in hand. But the more he imagined it, the less satisfying it seemed. Words weren't enough. By the end of the week, Daniel had come to a decision. He wouldn't just confront her. He would make her feel something she had denied him. Fear. Powerlessness. He started by writing a note and slipping it under the door while Alyssa was asleep. No signature, no accusation. Just 6 words, neatly printed in all caps. I know what you did to me. The next morning, Alyssa called him 17 times. He didn't answer. He wanted her to sit in that terror, to wonder. The seeds were planted, and Daniel had no intention of stopping. Alyssa's world unraveled quickly. In the days following the note, she became visibly paranoid. Neighbors would later recall seeing her peeking out the windows at odd hours, pacing the front porch with a cigarette she barely smoked. At work, she called out sick twice, citing anxiety attacks to her supervisor. Daniel watched from a distance. He had moved out, staying at a motel across town, but he drove past their house several times a day, always slowly, always watching. Sometimes he parked down the street and stared through the windshield, just out of sight. He wasn't rushing. He wanted her to stew in fear. On the third day after the note, Alyssa finally broke the silence. She texted him a long, frantic message. "Daniel, I am so sorry. Please talk to me. Please. We can fix this. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I love you. I never stopped loving you. Please don't hate me." Daniel stared at the message for nearly an hour without responding. Every word sounded hollow, rehearsed. The next night, he escalated. He waited until after midnight, parked a block away, and walked to the house. A black hoodie concealed his face. He moved silently around the perimeter, unscrewing one of the porch light bulbs and jamming a small piece of wood into the latch of a ground floor window, loosening it just enough. Then he rang the doorbell. He sprinted back into the darkness before Alyssa could reach the door. Watching from behind a neighbor's fence, Daniel saw her turn on every light in the house. He saw the way her hands shook as she checked every lock, peered into every shadow. He knew he had her now. She was slipping, unraveling in the same way she had unraveled his life. But Daniel wasn't satisfied with fear alone. He wanted Alyssa to confess, really confess, to everything she had done. Not because he needed closure, not because he wanted the truth, but because he wanted her broken, stripped of every lie she had used to shield herself. He spent the next morning crafting an anonymous email from a throwaway account. It contained screenshots of the recovered text messages with other men, time-stamped hotel bookings, a copy of her positive HIV test from a hacked hospital portal, every scrap of evidence he had. He sent it to Alyssa's personal account with a single subject line: "You lied to everyone." The response came less than an hour later. Another email, this time rambling, disjointed, barely coherent. Alyssa swore that she had been scared, that she had thought it was under control, that she loved him too much to lose him. She begged him not to ruin her life. She said she had been planning to tell him after the wedding when things settled down. It was the final nail in her coffin. Daniel printed the email and tucked it into a manila envelope. He wasn't going to ruin Alyssa's life, he was going to end it. The first time Daniel truly envisioned her death, it was disturbingly mundane. He sat in his car outside a hardware store, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. He wasn't thinking about screaming, blood, or chaos. He imagined silence, clean and final. That night, he returned to the house while Alyssa was at her evening dance class, something she hadn't yet canceled, clinging to the last tattered remnants of normalcy. Daniel used the loosened window latch to slip inside without leaving a trace. He moved carefully, wearing gloves. Inside, he studied her living space with detached curiosity. The half-drunk coffee cup on the counter, the stack of unopened wedding gifts gathering dust, the sticky note on the fridge with a grocery list, champagne, strawberries, candles. He spent almost an hour inside, making subtle changes Alyssa wouldn't immediately notice but would deeply unsettle her. Moving a picture frame slightly off-center, swapping the positions of 2 kitchen chairs, unplugging her bedside lamp. Before he left, he placed a second envelope on her pillow. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph, Daniel standing just outside the house, staring into the camera. It was time-stamped 2 hours earlier. No note, no explanation. Just undeniable proof. I am closer than you think. When Alyssa came home and found it, her neighbors heard the scream. The police came, a half-hearted wellness check that turned up nothing. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no suspect. They filed a report and left her alone again. Daniel watched it all from a car down the street, his heart calm, steady. Over the next 2 days, Alyssa's behavior deteriorated further. She stopped answering calls from her friends. She barely left the house except for frantic, rapid trips to the pharmacy, the hardware store, and back. One neighbor mentioned she had purchased a baseball bat. Another said she was seen installing extra locks on the doors, but locks wouldn't save her. Daniel knew it was time to finish what he started. The psychological phase was complete. She was isolated, terrified, trapped. He needed to choose the night carefully. It couldn't be random. It needed to mean something. and then it hit him. Exactly 1 week to the day after he found out about the HIV diagnosis. A perfect grim symmetry. He circled the date on a piece of motel stationery and folded it into his wallet. Meanwhile, Alyssa made one last desperate move. She left him a voicemail. Her voice was trembling, broken, almost unrecognizable. "Daniel, please. If you hear this, I love you. I'm sorry, I made mistakes. I made terrible mistakes, but I never stopped loving you. Please, please don't hurt me." Daniel listened to it once, then deleted it. It changed nothing. The countdown had begun. The days leading up to the chosen night passed with agonizing slowness for Daniel, but he used the time meticulously. Every detail mattered. He mapped out the house's layout on hotel notepads, marked the locations of every door, every window, every potential obstacle. He practiced silently moving through narrow spaces, learned exactly where the floorboards creaked. He even timed Alyssa's nightly routines, parking far enough to remain unseen but close enough to watch the flicker of lights switching off one by one. He chose his tools with the same dispassion he once reserved for drafting architectural blueprints. Rope for restraint, a heavy rubber mallet, blunt, silent, effective. Plastic sheeting to minimize forensic evidence, duct tape, gloves, a change of clothes. He purchased everything from different stores, miles apart, days apart, always cash, always wearing different jackets and hats. No receipts, no trails. Meanwhile, Alyssa moved like a ghost. Surveillance footage from local businesses later showed her, blank-eyed, disheveled, wandering aisles with no clear purpose. She installed a third deadbolt on her front door. She stopped answering phone calls entirely, including those from her own parents. At one point, she even scheduled a consultation with a local therapist. The appointment was for the following week. She wouldn't live to make it. On the final day, Daniel visited the house in the early afternoon under the pretense of retrieving some personal belongings. Alyssa, too exhausted to argue, let him in. For a moment, the sight of her almost gave him pause. She looked nothing like the vibrant, laughing woman he had once planned to marry. Her hair was unwashed, tied in a limp knot. Her skin was pale, her eyes red and glassy. She had lost weight. Too much. She didn't even look angry, just broken. "Daniel, please," she whispered as he collected a duffel bag of clothes. He said nothing. He walked past her like she wasn't there. Later that night, after sunset, Daniel prepared for the final act. He dressed in black, layered latex gloves under leather ones, and placed everything into a nondescript backpack. He wrote a note and left it in his motel room. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. She deserved it." He didn't expect anyone to sympathize. He didn't care. It was almost midnight when Daniel approached the house for the last time. The neighborhood was silent, the street lamps casting long, skeletal shadows across the cracked sidewalks. He moved swiftly, muscle memory guiding him to the back window he had tampered with weeks before. It slid open without a sound. Daniel entered, closing it gently behind him. The house smelled like fear. A cloying mixture of sweat, cheap air freshener, and something sourer he couldn't name. He listened carefully. The only sound was the faint whir of the refrigerator. Alyssa was upstairs, in the bedroom. The light was on. Daniel gripped the mallet tighter in his gloved hand and began to climb the stairs, each step deliberate, inevitable. Tonight, he told himself, would bring an end to both their suffering, but he had no idea how much chaos was still to come. The upstairs hallway smelled of dust and lingering perfume. Daniel paused outside Alyssa's bedroom door, his breath slow and steady. Through the thin wood, he could hear soft movements, the rustling of sheets, the creak of the mattress, as Alyssa shifted restlessly. She wasn't asleep. Fear had taken even that from her. Slowly, Daniel reached out and turned the handle. The door swung open with a muted whine. Alyssa sat upright in bed, eyes wide, paralyzed for a moment as she registered the dark figure looming in the doorway. "Daniel?" Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. He stepped inside without answering. She scrambled back against the headboard, fumbling for her phone on the nightstand. Daniel crossed the room in 3 long strides and knocked it from her hand with the mallet's handle. It clattered to the floor. Alyssa let out a short, broken sob. "Please," she whimpered. "Please don't." Daniel struck her hard across the face with the back of the mallet. It wasn't a killing blow. Not yet. It sent her sprawling across the bed, dazed, blood trickling from her mouth. He moved fast. Before she could regain her senses, he yanked the rope from his pocket and pinned her wrists together, tying them roughly. Alyssa struggled weakly, moaning in panic, but she was too disoriented to fight back effectively. When her wrists were secured, Daniel pulled the duct tape from his jacket and slapped a strip over her mouth. Her sobs became muted, desperate sounds. He sat down on the edge of the bed for a moment, staring at her. In that silence, reality seemed to pause. Two broken people locked in a final, irreversible tableau. Daniel spoke for the first time in days. His voice was eerily calm. "You took my life away," he said simply. "Now I'm taking yours." Alyssa shook her head violently, tears streaming down her cheeks, her entire body trembling against the mattress. She tried to scream through the tape, tried to plead with her eyes. Daniel lifted the mallet again. The first heavy blow landed on her temple. Her body jerked violently. A gurgling sound escaped her throat. Blood began pooling on the sheets instantly. The second blow shattered her cheekbone. The third caved in part of her skull. Daniel kept swinging, 6, 7, 8 times, long after Alyssa stopped moving. When he finally lowered the mallet, he was panting, sweat dripping from his forehead, the room spinning slightly. Alyssa was unrecognizable. Her face was a pulp of blood, bone fragments and shredded tissue. One eye stared blankly, the other was destroyed. The pillow beneath her head was soaked through with blood, and it continued to spread outward in a dark, obscene halo. Daniel stood up slowly, dropping the mallet onto the floor with a dull, wet thud. There was no triumph, no relief, just an immense, crushing stillness. He stared at what was left of Alyssa Morgan, the woman he had once imagined a future with, and felt nothing at all. The final act was complete, but Daniel wasn't finished yet. He moved mechanically, pulling the plastic sheeting from his bag and spreading it across the floor. He stripped the blood-soaked bedding and began wrapping Alyssa's mutilated body with clinical efficiency. It was over, but covering it up was just beginning. Daniel worked quickly but methodically. The first priority was containing the blood. He stripped the remaining bedding, soaking up what he could with towels he later shoved into a trash bag. He mopped at the slick patches on the floorboards with cleaning solvent, scrubbing until his arms ached. He wrapped Alyssa's body as tightly as he could manage, securing the plastic with lengths of duct tape until she resembled nothing more than a grotesque, misshapen parcel. But the blood was everywhere. Tiny flecks on the wall, droplets near the nightstand, a smear on the edge of the doorframe he hadn't noticed until the last minute. It was worse than he anticipated. Blood had a way of finding the smallest cracks and crevices. Still, he pressed on. He stuffed the mallet, rope, tape, and his bloody gloves into a second trash bag, careful to double bag it. He planned to dispose of the evidence miles away in different dumpsters. Spread it out? No pattern. At some point, he caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at him was unrecognizable. Sunken-eyed, hollow, blood speckled across his cheek. His black hoodie was soaked at the cuffs. He stripped it off and stuffed it into yet another trash bag. The minutes dragged into an hour. Daniel was almost finished when he heard a sound that froze him in place. A soft knock at the front door. His heart slammed against his ribs. He stood perfectly still, listening. Another knock. Then a woman's voice, muffled but distinct. "Alyssa, it's Megan. Are you okay? You haven't been answering my texts." Panic flared in Daniel's chest. Megan, Alyssa's best friend. The one bridesmaid she had kept close even after everything started falling apart. He waited, barely breathing. After a minute, he heard Megan's footsteps retreat down the porch steps. A car door slammed. An engine rumbled away. Daniel exhaled slowly. Close. Too close. The window for escape was shrinking. If Megan had a key, if she returned later with police, it would all be over. Daniel dragged the wrapped body down the stairs, each thump against the steps sending spikes of fear through him. Alyssa was heavier than he expected, awkward to maneuver, her limbs bending unnaturally inside the plastic. Outside, the night had deepened into a thick, oppressive silence. He staggered to his car, a nondescript old sedan he had rented under a fake name 2 days earlier, and shoved the body into the trunk. He slammed it shut with shaking hands. Daniel knew he couldn't leave the house looking untouched. Alyssa's friends were suspicious already. The missing bedding, the blood residue he couldn't fully scrub away, it would all point to foul play, but he was out of time. He gave the bedroom one last glance, wiped down the doorknobs and slipped out the back way, vanishing into the night like a ghost. In the trunk behind him, Alyssa's ruined body shifted with every bump in the road. Daniel didn't look back. Daniel drove aimlessly at first, blood pounding in his ears louder than the engine. Every pair of headlights that passed felt like an accusation. Every bump in the road made the bundled corpse shift audibly in the trunk. He headed north, out of Brighton Falls, into the dense woods and isolated farmlands that surrounded the town. At 2 a.m, he finally found a spot, a rough, disused service road leading into the woods, overgrown with weeds and littered with rusted-out appliances. No surveillance, no houses in sight. He pulled the car into the brush and killed the lights. For a few minutes, he simply sat there, gripping the steering wheel, gathering what little resolve he had left. Then he popped the trunk. The smell hit him immediately. Blood, plastic, death. He gagged but forced himself to stay focused. Daniel dragged Alyssa's body out of the trunk, her limbs knocking loosely against the frame of the car. She was heavier now, somehow. Dead weight in the most literal sense. He stumbled through the weeds, his boots sinking into soft, wet earth, until he found a shallow depression behind a fallen tree. He hadn't brought a shovel, a mistake he hadn't thought would matter until now. Using his hands and a broken branch, Daniel scraped at the dirt, carving out a rough hollow. Sweat poured down his face despite the chill in the air. His nails cracked. His arms ached. It was a pathetic excuse for a grave, but it would have to do. He rolled the plastic-wrapped body into the depression, covering it hastily with branches, leaves, and the loose soil he had managed to displace. It looked rushed, clumsy. He knew it wouldn't last long under any real scrutiny. He doused the area with bleach from a bottle he had brought, hoping to mask the scent, and scattered more debris to obscure the disturbed ground. By the time he stumbled back to the car, he was filthy, shaking, and colder than he had ever felt in his life. He drove away without looking back. But Daniel hadn't noticed what he left behind. Near the trunk, half buried in the grass, was one of Alyssa's hair ties. Bright red, unmistakably feminine. It would be the first clue investigators would find. Meanwhile, back in Brighton Falls, Megan was growing more worried by the hour. The unanswered texts, the unreturned calls, the strange tension she had felt standing on the porch. By noon the next day, Megan had convinced Alyssa's parents to call the police for a welfare check. 2 officers arrived that afternoon. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again, harder. Eventually, a neighbor, the same one who had seen Daniel lurking weeks earlier, mentioned that Alyssa had seemed afraid lately, like she was hiding from someone. That was enough to justify forcing the door. Inside, the house was cold and eerily silent. Upstairs, they found the bedroom, stripped of bedding, a faint but distinct metallic smell still lingering in the air. And on the nightstand, something small but damning. A single droplet of blood missed during Daniel's rushed cleanup. The missing woman's case was now officially a potential crime scene. Daniel spent the day after the murder trying to construct a version of normalcy. He went to a coffee shop he rarely visited, ordered a black coffee he barely touched, and sat by the window pretending to scroll through his phone. Every noise, every scrape of a chair, every car door slamming in the distance made him flinch. He knew the clock was ticking. That afternoon, Megan left another voicemail. Her voice was different now, clipped, formal. "The police are looking for you, Daniel. They have questions. Call me back." He didn't. Instead, Daniel went back to the motel and scrubbed the interior of the rental car until his hands bled, desperate to erase any trace of Alyssa's blood, hair, fibers, anything. He returned the car to the agency under a different clerk than the one who had rented it to him, avoiding eye contact, forcing himself to smile. But a neighbor's security camera, one Daniel hadn't noticed during his frantic cleanup, had already captured him moving suspiciously around the house late that night. The police were connecting dots faster than he realized. At Alyssa's home, forensic teams worked methodically. Luminol revealed faint blood patterns on the mattress and floorboards, even though Daniel had tried to scrub them away. The missing bedding, the disrupted furniture, the faint smudge on the doorframe, it all spoke of violence. And then there was the drop of blood on the nightstand. It matched Alyssa's DNA profile almost immediately. Brighton Falls police quickly classified the case as a presumed homicide, even though no body had yet been found. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing everyone who knew Alyssa. Her friends painted a chilling picture. She had been fearful, paranoid. Talking about someone stalking her. Daniel's name came up over and over. Her fiancé, her rock, until everything changed. Her withdrawal. Her fear. The sudden cancellation of wedding plans. The same neighbor who had seen Megan at the house also mentioned Daniel's car parked near Alyssa's place at odd hours, even after he had supposedly moved out. Within 48 hours, Daniel was officially listed as a person of interest. They knocked on the door of his motel room at 7:13 p.m. on a gray, rainy evening. Daniel answered wearing jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, a smile pasted awkwardly on his face. Two plainclothes detectives, McAdams and Velez, introduced themselves, calm, polite. But their eyes were sharp, clinical. "Just a few questions," McAdams said. "About Alyssa." Daniel let them in. He didn't think he had a choice. Inside the motel room, the detectives immediately picked up on signs. The second-hand smell of bleach clinging faintly to Daniel's clothes. The way his hands trembled slightly when he poured himself water. The questioning was casual at first. "When was the last time you saw Alyssa? Had you noticed anything strange? Did you know she was planning to see a therapist? Were you two still in contact?" Daniel stuck to his script. He hadn't seen her in days. They had taken a break. No, he didn't know anything about therapy. He was heartbroken, confused, worried. The detectives nodded, jotting notes, offering sympathetic expressions. But when they left, Daniel knew, somewhere deep inside, that they didn't believe a word of it. He had bought himself hours, maybe a day, nothing more. The next morning, Daniel woke to the sound of his phone vibrating violently against the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's important." A minute later, another. "They know more than you think. Be smart." Daniel's hands shook as he set the phone down. He didn't know who it was. Megan, maybe? The police, using a tactic? Someone from Alyssa's side of the family? Paranoia gnawed at the edges of his mind. He stayed in the motel room most of the day, the television flickering images he wasn't really seeing. At some point, he turned to local news. Alyssa's picture flashed across the screen, a smiling portrait from happier days, now attached to the caption, "Missing Brighton Falls woman, foul play suspected." Daniel's stomach twisted. The news anchor detailed the investigation. Police had uncovered evidence of violence in Alyssa's home. Her fiancé, Daniel Wyatt, was cooperating but had no confirmed alibi for the night she disappeared. The public was asked to call with any information. He was being hunted. And then came the breaking point. Late that afternoon, two patrol cars pulled into the motel parking lot. Daniel, peeking through the curtain, froze. They weren't coming for him. Not yet. They were talking to the motel manager, smiling, shaking hands. A routine check, Daniel told himself. But deep down, he knew better. The next day, detectives returned to question him again, this time more directly. "Where were you between midnight and 3 a.m. the night Alyssa disappeared?" Detective McAdams asked, flipping casually through a notebook. Daniel stammered something about driving around, clearing his head. No witnesses, no cameras, just him alone in the dark. Velez nodded, writing it down. "You mind if we search your car?" Daniel blinked. His heart thudded. The rental car was already returned, but his own car, his real car, wasn't entirely clean either. Muddy tires. A faint, lingering scent of bleach inside. He smiled weakly and said, "Of course, nothing to hide." Later, forensic teams would swab the interior. They would lift microscopic traces of Alyssa's blood from the fabric near the trunk lining, so faint Daniel hadn't even noticed. It wasn't enough for an arrest yet, but it was enough to tighten the noose. Meanwhile, at the scene where Daniel had buried Alyssa's body, investigators following up on a tip about a suspicious vehicle found tire tracks leading into the woods. It wasn't definitive yet, but the search teams marked the location for a deeper sweep. Back at the motel that night, Daniel sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't eaten all day. His body felt brittle, like one wrong move would shatter him. He thought about running, about grabbing what little cash he had left and disappearing. But he also knew that running would be a confession. He was trapped. The only thing he could do now was wait, and hope that the grave in the woods stayed hidden just a little longer. What Daniel didn't realize was that a storm front was rolling in, predicted to bring heavy rain by the weekend. And shallow graves don't hold up well against torrential downpours. The storm broke 2 days later, drenching Brighton Falls in relentless pounding rain. Roads flooded, yards turned into shallow lakes. In the woods where Daniel had buried Alyssa, the ground churned into thick, heavy mud. The loose covering of soil and debris he had thrown together washed away under the assault of water. The body shifted closer to the surface with each passing hour. Meanwhile, Daniel tried to hold on to normalcy, or at least the appearance of it. He went to work sporadically, arriving late, leaving early. Co-workers noticed how gaunt he looked, how often he seemed lost in thought, how easily he startled at the sound of his phone ringing. At night, he barely slept, haunted by half-formed visions of Alyssa's ruined face. He knew the grave wouldn't hold forever. It was only a matter of when, not if. On the third morning after the storm, a hunter walking his dog near the service road caught a sickening smell coming from the woods. He followed it, grimacing, and stumbled upon something he would never forget: the edge of a plastic tarp, tangled in roots and debris, slick with mud and torn open enough to reveal a human foot. The hunter called 911, his voice trembling. Within an hour, the scene was cordoned off with yellow police tape. Detectives McAdams and Velez arrived, grim-faced, as forensic teams began the slow, methodical process of unearthing the body. Even through the decomposition and the damage inflicted by Daniel's mallet, the body was identified as female. The red hair tie, matching others Alyssa was known to wear, was found nearby, partially buried in the mud. Fingerprints were damaged, but dental records would soon confirm the inevitable. They had found Alyssa Morgan. The news spread fast. By sunset, Daniel knew. He saw the bulletin flash across the motel television. Body found in woods, likely connected to missing Brighton Falls woman. He sat on the edge of the bed, frozen, barely breathing. His mind reeled for options. Fleeing seemed more impossible than ever. Police already had his fingerprints, his DNA, his statements. They had tracked his phone's movements. His lies were unraveling faster than he could patch them together. All he had left was time, and even that was evaporating. Later that night, Daniel tried to erase evidence from his motel room. He flushed receipts, scrubbed surfaces, packed hurriedly. But it was too late. Surveillance cameras had already captured him coming and going on suspicious nights. His credit card use, his car rentals, his hardware store purchases, all left a trail. And as detectives built their timeline, a grim picture emerged. Motive: betrayal, rage, and a fatal diagnosis. Opportunity: Alyssa isolated, fearful, easy to manipulate. Means: blunt force trauma, confirmed by initial autopsy findings. It was enough to draft an arrest warrant. On the morning after the body's discovery, police surrounded the motel. Officers in tactical gear pounded on the door. This time, there would be no polite conversation. Daniel stood at the window for a moment, watching them approach. For the first time in days, he felt an eerie calm. It was over. He opened the door without a word as officers rushed in, pinning him to the floor, reading him his rights over the sound of rain still tapping against the roof. Daniel didn't resist. There was no point. Daniel sat in the small, windowless interrogation room, hands cuffed to a steel ring bolted into the table. The air was thick, stale. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly. Detectives McAdams and Velez entered the room, carrying thick folders and wearing the same composed expressions they had during the earlier motel interviews. But now, the gloves were off. McAdams dropped the file onto the table with a heavy thud. A single photo slid free. A crime scene photo, Alyssa's plastic-wrapped body half uncovered by the rain. Daniel flinched. McAdams leaned forward. "We know everything, Daniel. The only question left is whether you want the court to hear it from us, or from you." Daniel stared at the photo, swallowing hard. Velez took over, her tone softer but no less cutting. Running won't help you now, hiding won't help, lies won't help. What happens next depends on whether you tell the truth. Now. Daniel said nothing. He stared at the tabletop, tracing the faint scratches in the metal with his eyes. The detectives laid out the evidence methodically. The blood found in Alyssa's bedroom matched her DNA. Surveillance footage showed Daniel's car near Alyssa's house at suspicious hours. GPS data from his rental vehicle placed him near the woods where the body was discovered. Microscopic blood traces found inside his own car. His internet search history. How to erase blood stains. How deep to dig a grave. How to clean a crime scene. Each fact tightened the net around him. Finally, McAdams dropped the final blow. A forensic report confirming the mallet used in the murder matched indentations on Alyssa's skull, and that Daniel's fingerprints were on the remnants of the duct tape found in the woods. It was over. Daniel closed his eyes. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the steady hum of the lights. When he finally spoke, his voice was a dry whisper. "I didn't plan to, not at first." The detectives exchanged a glance but stayed quiet, letting him talk. "I just wanted her to be afraid," Daniel said. "I wanted her to feel what I felt. Alone, betrayed." He lifted his cuffed hand slightly, the chain rattling. "But when I saw her, that night, all I could think about was what she took from me. My health, my future, everything." He paused, breathing hard. "And then, I couldn't stop." He didn't offer details. He didn't have to. The confession was enough. Daniel's public defender arrived shortly after, a weary-looking woman named Lisa Crowder, who immediately ended the interrogation and demanded to review the charges. First-degree murder, concealment of a corpse, tampering with evidence. The list was long and final. The following morning, Daniel was transferred to the county jail to await his arraignment. He was placed in solitary confinement, partly for his own protection, partly because no one trusted him not to hurt himself. News of his arrest spread quickly through Brighton Falls. The town that had once celebrated Daniel and Alyssa's engagement now whispered in hushed voices about betrayal, rage, and a crime so brutal that even seasoned detectives struggled to describe it without flinching. Meanwhile, Alyssa's parents, devastated beyond words, began the grim task of planning a funeral for a daughter they barely recognized in the final photos. Daniel's arraignment took place 3 days after his confession. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras flashing as Daniel was led in, shackled at the wrists and ankles. His once neatly styled hair hung limp over hollow eyes. His jumpsuit, bright orange against the beige courtroom walls, marked him clearly as a man condemned by public opinion long before any verdict would be read. Judge Evelyn Cooper presided with quiet, steady authority. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Mark Schaefer, wasted no time laying out the charges: first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and evidence tampering. He requested no bail, citing the brutal nature of the crime, Daniel's unstable mental state, and the overwhelming risk of flight. Daniel's public defender, Lisa Crowder, said little, a few words about due process and constitutional rights. But she didn't contest the no-bail motion. She knew there was no chance. Judge Cooper agreed without hesitation. Daniel would remain in jail until trial. As he was led away, Daniel caught glimpses of faces in the gallery, faces he recognized, co-workers, neighbors, old friends, all of them staring at him like he was something monstrous, inhuman. The next day, his mugshot appeared on every local news station. It circulated on social media, accompanied by hashtags demanding justice for Alyssa. In the following weeks, the case dominated headlines. Brighton Falls fiancé charged with murder. Love, betrayal, and bloodshed inside the Wyatt Morgan tragedy. A town mourns as trial looms. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in a 6-by-9-foot cell, counting cracks in the wall. Jail was not what he had imagined. It wasn't loud or violent. It was numbing. Endless repetition, food trays shoved through a slot, guards who didn't make eye contact, other inmates who avoided him, not out of fear, but disdain. Murderers of strangers could find respect in jail. Murderers of people they claimed to love, especially women, found only contempt. Lisa Crowder visited twice a week, each time bringing worse news. The prosecution's case was airtight. DNA, phone records, surveillance footage, witness statements, his own confession. She floated the idea of a plea deal, life without parole, in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Daniel didn't respond. He barely listened. It wasn't that he wanted to die. It was that he couldn't imagine surviving the trial, the sentencing, the endless years alone in a concrete box, with nothing but memories of what he had done. Lisa pressed him again at the end of one visit. "If you take the plea, Daniel, it's over. No appeals, no trial, no dragging her family through more pain." He stared at the floor and said nothing. Across town, Alyssa's parents prepared for trial, bracing themselves to sit through days of testimony about the brutal final hours of their daughter's life. They refused interviews, but their lawyer made their position clear. No forgiveness, no mercy. They wanted Daniel to suffer, and Daniel, in his quiet, crumbling way, was already suffering in ways no sentence could quantify. Each night in his cell, he lay awake, listening to the distant clank of metal doors and the low murmur of guards on patrol, thinking about the last look on Alyssa's face, not the terror, but the betrayal. The same betrayal he had claimed to avenge. The irony gutted him more thoroughly than any blade ever could. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft scratch of pens on paper and the occasional shuffling of feet. Daniel stood before the judge, shackled, head bowed. Judge Evelyn Cooper reviewed the paperwork carefully before speaking, her voice even but heavy with finality. "Mr. Wyatt," she said, "you have been offered a plea agreement. Do you understand that by accepting it, you waive your right to a trial, to cross-examine witnesses, and to appeal your conviction?" Daniel nodded slowly. His throat was dry. "Do you wish to proceed?" For a long moment, no one breathed. Finally, Daniel whispered, "Yes, Your Honor." He would not fight. There would be no trial, no testimony from grieving friends, no parade of evidence spelling out in excruciating detail what everyone already knew. The judge accepted the plea. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Daniel was escorted out without ceremony, his orange jumpsuit disappearing down a side hallway. In the gallery, Alyssa's parents clutched each other tightly, tears running down their faces, not from relief, but from the emptiness that no sentence could ever fill. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but no one from either family spoke. The story had already told itself: betrayal, rage, death, and a future stolen from everyone involved. Daniel's world shrank even further after sentencing. Transferred to a maximum security prison upstate, he was placed in administrative segregation, protective custody, not out of kindness, but necessity. Inmates who killed women, especially those they were supposed to love, were marked men. His cell was smaller than his jail cell had been, the routines even more rigid. Wake up, meals, head count, lights out, repeat. He spent his days in silence, staring at the peeling gray paint, tracing the cracks in the walls like a prisoner of his own mind. There were no visitors, no letters, no future appeals, just the long, slow passage of time, marked only by the scrape of trays and the distant echo of steel doors slamming shut. Sometimes at night, Daniel thought about Alyssa. Not the Alyssa he had destroyed, but the Alyssa from before, laughing, dancing in the kitchen, humming off key. The weight of what he had done never lifted. It sat on his chest like a stone, suffocating and unmovable. He didn't fantasize about freedom. He didn't dream about escape. He simply existed, day after day, waiting for the slow erosion of time to finally, mercifully, erase him. Brighton Falls moved on. The headlines faded. The public outrage shifted to other scandals, other tragedies. But for those closest to Alyssa, her parents, her friends, the wound remained open, a scar that would never fully heal. And for Daniel, there was only one ending: an anonymous death in a cold, concrete box, remembered not for the man he had been, but for the monster he had become. A monster he had made with his own hands, one decision at a time. There would be no redemption, only silence.